Hello, and welcome to a very, very special episode of the Get Trauma Informed podcast. I know y'all say it every time I come on, I'm saying the very, very, very special of the Get Trauma Informed podcast. But today we have a special guest with us today. We have my mentor, my coach, my friend, my family member. Oh my goodness, manuscript development coach. I can go on and on and on and on. Coach Michael, how are you today?
I am supercalifragilisticexpialidocious today, and thank you for having me on Wellness Coach Liz.
Thank you so much. I am so excited. You all, we talked about walking through the pathway of trauma recovery and walking through with our author. So, who better to kick it off than our manuscript development coach and publisher and on and on and on, like I said before. But we're going to focus in on chapter number 2 in the Pathway to Trauma Recovery book. But before we get started, Coach Michael, can you answer this question? What does get trauma informed mean to you?
Ooh, that's a good hot seat, unscripted question. So now I have to pull that out of my heart, mind, body, spirit, and soul. What does trauma informed mean to me? What it means to me is now I'm gonna go back in time and come back to answer the question first, because that's the best way I can answer the question. Remember when we were children? Let's everybody go back into your childhood right now. I want to talk to everybody, to the little child inside of everybody, because that's what it meant to me. If trauma informed meant to me certain things that I could not explain that I was going through when I was a child that really was problematic as in a young Michael Bart Matthews' mind, body, and spirit. And so experiences that was not my fault, but I had to go through some of those experiences nonetheless. And those experiences were brought on by situations, circumstances, or other people forcing things upon me that I had to deal with that was against my normal way of thinking, living, acting, and being as a young child. And that carried on sometimes through different experiences when I was an adolescent and even when I was a young adult. Now that I'm older, mature adult, and I understand what being trauma informed means, to me, it means the things that happened to me, trauma was not my fault, but recovery is my fault. And recovery from what? Okay, back to the question. What does trauma informed mean for me? Like the loss of a loved one when you were a little kid and you didn't understand what that meant. And you kept looking for if it was a parent or a sibling or even your best friend, you no longer saw them anymore. That was traumatic for young Michael Bart Matthews, for example. And maybe many of you listeners out here as well, or maybe you lost someone in a car accident, or maybe you got robbed, maybe your house got caught on fire, or maybe any type of world event that was just traumatic in terminology and through experience that you just didn't know what happened. And then when you become trauma informed, that means trauma awareness first, because you're informed of the trauma, and now you are aware of the situation that happened to you, and therefore now you can go through it with a better understanding of why you're acting a certain way, what caused you to act that way, because now you are informed.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's go back to a clarifying point. When you say trauma, you said trauma is not your fault, recovery is your fault. But I think what you were saying is that the lack of the lack of putting the time into recovery, now that becomes your fault. Is that correct?
Yes, I always say recovery is your fault, but I really mean your responsibility. Let's thank you, our wellness coach, Liz. It's your responsibility, So, and in recovering from trauma is definitely your responsibility to seek out and to be informed. Once you're informed and you understand what it is, then it becomes your responsibility.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in your chapter, which I love your chapter, How to Win in the Game of Life. Man, I think, if we were to take the pages out of this book, we're like, okay, here's our playbook, right? Because oftentimes we say, life didn't come with no playbook, but here we go. We have a chapter dedicated to how to win at the game of life. And in that, you talk about your childhood. You care to give us a little bit of backstory on that?
Okay, well, let me just share. Thank you, wellness coach. Let me share something from my childhood, a real traumatic experience that I didn't know was trauma at the time, but I just knew it wasn't right. First, let's start off with my parents. My parents grew up in the South, and they both, before they knew each other, they both migrated to the North across the Mason-Dixon line into Illinois because living in the under the Jim Crow laws back in the South was very traumatic for African American families back during the 40s, 50s, and early 60s. So my mom said, well, she wasn't pregnant. She didn't know my father at the time, but she said when she was picking cotton at age 12, there was no way that she wanted to raise any kids in the South. So she prayed to God then. And I guess when her and my auntie at age 15 caught a Greyhound bus to Chicago when they was along doing the Great Migration to Chicago, her prayers were answered. But we used to go back down south to visit both our family members on both sides of the family, my mom's side and my dad's side. And this one particular trip, we were going down south and we stopped at a gas station in southern Illinois, Effingham, which was just the tip of the northern part of the South before we hit the deep South. And we knew about racism here in Chicago because that's what it was back then, but we didn't know about this one particular part of racism. And that was about the public facilities had Negro only and white only. We stopped for gas. My sister jumps out the car and starts running toward the drink of water in the white only fountain. But I'm glad my mom was running faster than Wilma Rudolph ever could win a gold medal. And she caught my sister on the back of her shirt collar before she reached that water fountain. And while she was doing that, there were 4 or 5 white men on the rocking chairs with shotguns, and they stood up. They didn't point them. They just stood up and was watching. And once my mom caught my sister and she didn't drink out of that water fountain, they sat down, but they kept watching. So my mom escorted my sister into the colored only washroom. And my dad was pumping gas and he escorted my brother and I into the Negro colored only males washroom and came back. We got in the car and left. As we were leaving, that became the real first conversation about racism through our traumatic little ears, meaning my brother, my sister, and I, about racism in the South and how you have to act a certain way. Because even though the Jim Crow laws were not legal, they were definitely put into practice by most white Americans in the South back in those days. Not all, but most.
Right. Wow. That was very traumatic, again. And then, having that experience as a child and not understanding or being able to navigate through that, that was the first seed of trauma. And we don't understand that, or we don't become aware of that. Then as adults, we start making decisions based on that. I can just go back to my mom having a lot of fear. And now that we're talking through this, I can see where some of her fear came from, right? From her growing up back in the South in those days as well. So thank you for sharing that. As we continue to move through, and we're not, like I told everybody at the beginning of us walking through the pathway to trauma recovery, we're going to give a little teaser throughout the chapters, but you'll have to get the book in order to get the full extent of the chapter. So thank you for sharing that, Coach Mike. I know we were talking a little bit about going into your adolescence and some of the decisions that shaped you through your adolescent period. But there were some things that happened to you that kind of shaped the outcome. So could you want to share about that as well?
Well, there were several stories within stories that shaped me during my adolescent years. But let me tell you one about one during my high school times then. That one just fits with me to this very day, and one story that I never forget because it involved my girlfriend, Nikki. And for the sake of this story, I played on a city championship, a state championship, and I was a all-star in high school. And I had a girlfriend, and for 4 years, same girlfriend, but I never met her parents. And the reason I never met her parents because they lived in the Chicago housing projects. Now, I'm not talking down on people who grew up or lived in the Chicago housing projects. I'm just simply stating in Chicago, There was a saying said, if you're not from around here, you just down here. That meant they knew you didn't belong and you was fair game to whatever happened. So using my street sense, I just never went. But because we were getting so much press and on the local news, her mother wanted to meet me so bad. I did not follow my internal guiding system. You know, that little man on your shoulder or woman that tells you do this or do that. For 4 years, it told me, don't go down there. Something's going to happen. The minute I went down there, we get down in front of the building. About 5 or 6 kids were standing outside of the building. And said, hey, Mickey. And she said hello. And then they gave me the customary nod. I gave them the customary nod, but they didn't speak to me. But that made me feel comfortable enough that they knew her. So I figured if she knows everybody in the building, we're going to be okay. Long story short, we ran up the 18th elevator, just like it was in the good times, but it was different than that. Trust me, the good times is just a TV version of what it looked like. It was totally different. Get up to the 18th floor, mom's cooked the big spread, make the whole family come back down, get ready to leave. And guess what? Those same 6 or 7 kids were younger than me, so I called them kids. They all had guns. When I stepped off the elevator, one of them put the gun up to my head, and the rest of them robbed my girlfriend Mickey and cocked the hammer back. Click. That's one sound I'll never forget. When they were robbing me, they were telling Mickey to tell the big fella if me and the big fella tell on us that they're going to come back and get her family. So an angel came out. I'll call him an angel because he shot up in the air and chased them away. Oh, my 16, 17-year-old self felt relief, but to my dismay, they stopped, turned around, and shot at us. You can hear the bullets ricocheting off the steel and concrete off the building. You can even see sparks flying from the bullets ricocheting. And as I pushed Mickey to the ground, when the bullets stopped flying, I heard her on the ground crying and screaming, and she was in a puddle of blood. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't know if she was living or dying. That same guardian angel helped inexperienced me to put her in the back seat of a car, told me where the nearest hospital was, and said, gunshot wound. That's all you tell them. That's all they need to know. So, of course, when you say gunshot wound, they call the police, right? Right. So the police came. Mickey happened to be okay, but they wanted us to look at mug shots to identify the kids. So here's a second part of that story that brings about more trauma. I wanted to get them guys in trouble because they all shot at me and shot my girlfriend. But I had to remember because Mickey said, Mike, remember, they said, if you tell on us, they're going to come back and get her family. So for the safety of her family, because I didn't live in the projects, I decided not to tell because I didn't want anything to happen to Mickey's family after that incident. Long story short, again, a year later, I go off to college. I get a message and a call saying, Michael, your girlfriend Mickey has been killed in a head-on car collision. Wow. So within 18 months, this is what happened. Very traumatic. I got robbed. I got shot at. My girlfriend got shot and she died in 18 months. Do you know how that affected me? And not having any spiritual guidance from trauma informed, no coaching advice from trauma informed. Of course, my mom and dad say what they had to say, but that's what they're supposed to do. But I had to deal with that myself, not knowing it was trauma, but knowing it was something that weighed heavy on my shoulders.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we know that when trauma is not dealt with, it becomes progressive. So therefore, it's just sitting there, it's festering. It never goes away until you actually walk into some type of recovery, or like you, Coach Mike, you are known for mindset. Your book, and I know this is not about that book, it's about the pathway to trauma recovery, but your book, 52 Shades of Inspiration, is an amazing mindset book that helps us to understand how important it is to have a positive mindset, to have positive motivation, inspiration in front of you, and to be able to read those. Like you have 52. So 52 weeks in a year, we have positivity pouring inside of us. So again, thank you for that. As we continue to dive deeper in your story, we talk about, the decisions that were made without without trauma-informed coaches. So we get into that portion because, again, this is why we have the Get Trauma-Informed movement, so that we can become more aware, even as leaders over our children, leaders in church, leaders, period. Would you like to speak to that point?
Well, I'm not going to share it all because we want each and every one of you to read the story in the book, because I share all of it in my chapter in the book. But after I got the news from my girlfriend, let's piggyback off of that, by not being trauma informed, and as Dr. Liz and Wellness Coach Liz said, it progressed. I progressed deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole of isolation, down the rabbit hole of despair, down the rabbit hole of drinking, down the rabbit hole of drugs, by the rabbit hole of not becoming a successful person as I knew I could have been had I had the right leadership, being trauma informed, to lead me down that right path. Because at that point, I was so trauma uninformed that it affected me so much. So I just wanted to relieve the mental stress and pain. So I went to those things that I just mentioned. Now, to tell you how I went through it and more of what happened and how I came through it, and I am the person I am today, you have to buy the book and read the chapter. And we recommend you, and the book is not for us to really gain financially. It's because trauma affects everyone around the world in all 152 plus countries. It doesn't matter what color you are, what age you are, how much money you make, what job you have, what language you speak, what continent you live on, and what time zone. Trauma will come in and knock on your door and say, I'm here.
Absolutely, absolutely. And with the CDC stating that 70 to 80% of the population have suffered trauma, it does bear the reason that our book, The Pathway to Trauma Recovery, and that's why we're walking through it, Pathway to Trauma Recovery is a must-have. It should be in every household, whether you have suffered from trauma or rather you're supporting someone through a trauma journey. This is an amazing book that features amazing authors across the world, and forward written by NFL retired lineman Marcus Ogden. So this is a great book to read. Coach Michael, I wanted to touch on just a little bit about relationship capital, because in part of the recovery journey, it's important to have positive people around you that can help to support you in your journey, right? And so we built an amazing partnership and relationship through relationship capital. Coach Mike and I met on another platform when I was looking to write my book, It's Smoothie Time. And he helped me do what We Create Books, his company, does, which is get your story out of your head so it can be published and read. In my case, it was sitting dusty on the shelf for many, many, many years. And he and his amazing team was able to help me get that story out of my head so that it can now be published and read. And I'm now on my third book. And I would not have been able to do that had I not felt safe. And this is another part of trauma. Trauma steals your sense of safety, your sense of being able to trust. And so when I met Coach Michael, I had a trust issue, and he was able to walk with me and work me through that. He had such great integrity. I knew his wife before I knew her personally because of the integrity that he brought to the table. Coach Mike, you want to talk a little bit about our building relationship capital?
Right. And the trust issue for you men, it's not a personal issue. It's just a trust issue. And because of how men act like boys in a grown man body when it comes to women, they have trust issues. And it's up to real men, and because all of us are males, but we all are not men. You have to grow into manhood or be taught how to be a man, observe men, and understand who you are as a man so you can respect a woman. So when I met Dr. Liz on that other platform, I didn't know who she was from Jane or Adam. But I heard her and her cousin, they were always contributing good content to the other platform. And then a mutual executive of that company personally introduced us because she wanted to write a book and he knew I was a manuscript development specialist. So therefore, we formed our own relationship along the journey. But with that being said, before I even spoke with her, I always talked about my wife when it was my turn to speak on the platform. Why did I do that? For two reasons. One, I wanted people to know that I was married, man and women, and I'm not here to pick up a woman. I'm here to pick up friends, business partners, business relationships, affiliates, and collaborations so we can help make this world a better place. And the more that I would state that, the more men would say, well, Mike, you're breaking the good old boys club. I say, well, that's a problem because women were not involved at the good old boys club. I'll just say here in the United States when this country was formed, and that's been the attitude ever since, in my own opinion. So the relationship that it took for me to be with Dr. Liz was simply to show her since I was married, that was the problem there. I'm not going to say problem, it was a barrier, not a problem, but to show her the authenticity that I had in myself as a man, the love I had for my wife, but there's room for you in terms of friendship, business, affiliates, mentorship, and equal partnership. Because before Dr. Liz met me, I was a staunch supporter of all empowering women. Whether I know you or not, I'm going to respect you. Why? My mother, my sister, and all of the other 50 to 60 plus, yes, grammar school females that I still know to this very day. Yes, I still know them to this very day, and I can pick up the phone and we can talk for hours, but we don't, but we can. Just because of the nature of the word respect. If I can respect me, then it's easy to respect a woman. And so there, I showed that to Dr. Liz, and to this day, I've never had to change. Even when Robbie, that's my wife's name, when she's not around, I act the same as though she was around. So when I bring her around and introduce her, I don't have to worry about what the other female that I'm talking to is going to say, because I'm not going to say nothing out of pocket, out of step to embarrass me or to embarrass her because I was a male and not a man.
Amazing. That is so amazing. And then that's exactly what I got. And that's why we've been able to forge such an amazing relationship as we continue to move forward and again, bring out the Pathway to Trauma Recovery, another project as a result of that collaboration and that relationship. So in that, Coach Michael, how has trauma empowered and inspired you?
Oh, it has empowered and inspired me to continue to stay in the moment and stay focused and pay attention to have awareness of my own trauma after you tricked me in a good way to become trauma informed. And let me share that quick story first about empowerment. Wellness coach Liz was on a Zoom call and she called me up and said, Michael, I think you're like this. It only takes 5 minutes. So she always gives good leads. So whatever, if I'm not busy, I'll just jump on right then, which I wasn't busy, and I jumped on right then. And I liked what I heard, but that 5 minutes, that one day, I don't remember how long that day went, but I can remember it actually lasted 9 whole months later. But to my surprise, 9 months later, we both became certified addiction recovery coaches, certified addiction abuse coaches, and we became ministers. And since then, I've had my honorary PhD in theology, which is would never have happened had I not had that 5 minute phone call, had we not had that mutual relationship capital and respect from one another. So that's another example of men. If you want to learn a thing or two, keep your mind open like a parachute when women open their mouth and speak, because they do have great things to talk about.
That is amazing. That's amazing. And I'm really, really, really excited about this because we also have formed the Pathway to Trauma Recovery Support Group. And you can go to oasiswellnesscenters.com and become a part of that recovery journey. And as we wrap up, Coach Michael, what would you say to someone facing trauma?
Hmm. I would ask them, is it okay if I can coach you or talk to you first? I would ask their permission if I don't have the relationship, because when you just pour your thoughts onto somebody else, you can hurt them rather than help them if they're not ready to receive it. Number one. So if the answer is yes, it's okay, I'd ask them again because trauma is a heavy issue, but it's an issue to be that you can overcome, like Wellness Coach Liz and myself. and the majority of the people who around the world have been able to overcome. So at that point, I would point out the differences in adolescence, childhood, and adults and young adults experiences, and ask them to share the story. And I will go into the 7 layers of why to help them bring out why their traumatic experience has happened to them, because they probably, if you are like me, you never thought about it. But once you think about it, the answer lies from within your own traumatic experience. But once the person hears themselves say it, that's when transformation can begin, because now they can accept it, because now, oh, that's what happened to me. And they said it themselves, they thought of it themselves. So coaches and therapists, we're not therapists, we're coaches. We're just the guideposts to get you to think and dig deeper and deeper and deeper into your experiences, so you can identify that A, you are now aware, and now you're being informed. And then we have the resources to help you to continue to go through the trauma and come out on the other side with your illuminated light that shines your pathway to trauma and recovery, like it has done for so many millions of people. And yes, it can do the same for each and every one of you who hears the sound of my voice.
Absolutely. Wow. What a great conversation. And I'm looking forward to walking through each chapter with the other authors, because you can hear somebody else's voice and it can resonate with you. And that will spark the light to say, wait a minute, that was traumatic that I went through, but there is help on the other side of that, right? There is help on the other side. So, Coach Mike, is there anything that you want to leave us with today? I so am grateful for your presence in this conversation today and all that you bring to this Get Trauma Informed movement and the pathway to trauma recovery.
Well, yes, thank you. Well, today is World Mental Health Day, and World Mental Health Day has been celebrated since 1992, and it started with about 150 countries. It's well over 200 to 300 different countries today as we speak. And I just want to share a short conversation with some of our colleagues in the UK to let you know that this is not a local subject, trauma. It is in over 150 countries. But my colleagues in the UK, London, said that 1 out of 5 people who work remotely from home are isolated. They feel depressed. They don't answer the phone. They're sleeping. And then they also said 93% of some of those same people also suffer from traumatic isolation, and even though that was in the first percentile as well. But isolation is and I'm saying it twice on purpose, because when most people isolate, you get deeper into the mental health hole on the negative side, versus coming up and finding recovery and finding resources because you are reaching out. And lastly, our book is about reach out and touch somebody's hand. Help make this world a better place, because we can.
Transforming pain into power. I thank you, Coach Michael Bart Matthews. And you all can reach us. We look forward to actually seeing you inside of the support groups, or we'll see you on the next episode. All righty. Bye for now.
Bye.